Hello there, and welcome to the Delivery Cluster Series. This is learning module number 1, and essentially, out of the delivery cluster modules that we go through, we really want to equip and empower you to be able to truly understand what makes successful training delivery. There's a lot of preconceived ideas that people have around training delivery, what it is, how it should be, and all of that. But through the series, you're going to get a fundamental understanding about what creates effective training. And we really want to equip and empower you with some great strategies to really liven up your training sessions. And you'll be able to practice these strategies when you come to the face-to-face workshop for sure. If you're doing this via distance, you can certainly practice these with small groups of people or even just one-on-one. So the first cluster learning module is going to go through, again, the bigger picture of training. What are we really trying to achieve? The second module is going to go a little bit deeper into how do we really engage an audience and how do we really get the most out of time with our learners. And ultimately, the third module is really making sure that you wrap up your sessions effectively. And we're going to also talk about what needs to be covered in a session and all those different things. All right, so the delivery cluster is going to be a fantastic cluster series that you're really going to enjoy. So let's get straight into it. So, just again, the most out of this recorded webinar, definitely have a notepad available and definitely take lots of notes. Be prepared to do the activities, really go through them, and have a do not disturb sign on your desk. All right, make sure that you dedicate this time and your energy and your focus to really get the most out of what we're about to go through. Okay, so first thing that we want to address is getting over your nerves, because as we step into the realm of public speaking, we step into the realm of leadership and influence, guaranteed your nerves are going to be triggered occasionally and you may feel a little bit anxious about delivering your content. So I just want to address straight up that there will typically be 3 reasons that somebody will get nervous. Okay. Now you definitely want to grab a pen and write these down. So the first reason that somebody will get nervous is that they will have a perception that they are being extremely judged or overly judged by their audience. Okay. So there's going to be a perception that the all eyes on me is going to freak me out, okay? And the audience are judging the speaker to the extreme, okay? And that can certainly incite feelings of inferiority or a little bit anxious or things like that, right? That perception that you are being judged, okay? Now, the second part there, the second one, or the second reason that you may feel anxious or nervous is that you may have an undervalue for who you are and what you bring to the training world, okay? So it may be an undervalue of you. And the third one is an undervalue of your message, okay? So this one, A, is about the audience's perception of you. B is about the undervalue of what you have to bring, okay? And also your eligibility as an individual to stand up and influence as an authority, okay? And last of all, the value of the message that you're actually going to bring to the audience, okay? So you just need to be aware of the reasons that you could be triggered into nervousness and anxiety and all of that. Now, I will tell you that over time, your nerves and that feeling of adrenaline rush and all that, it will never, ever, ever, ever go away, okay? And you might be thinking, oh, that's not what I want to hear. I want to break through to my nervousness. Well, here's the thing. Whenever you are presenting to a brand new audience, and even it could be this content that you know and know very, very well, every time that you stand up and speak in front of a brand new audience, those feelings will come up because your unconscious mind is trying to preserve and protect you, and it's putting you into that state of fight or flight. But over time, you will definitely build up more self-confidence. However, those nervous feelings will continue to come up over time throughout your training career. And if they don't, then that's starting to be a concern and worry, because ultimately when they don't come up, that's when you're falling into complacency, okay? But now let's look at the 3 stages that you go through as a presenter, okay? And let's look at a question that's instantly going to reduce those nerves for you so that you can stand up in front of an audience, really feel empowered and not impacted on a physical level. Okay, so the 3 stages that you will go through as a presenter. First stage is that you will typically focus on yourself. So when you stand up in front of an audience, you'll be concerned, what does the audience think of me? What do they think of my shoes, my hair, my jewelry? What will they think of me? Okay, and people get very self-conscious. The second part, once you get over yourself, then you will start to worry about what will the audience think of my content. So stage 2 is all about your focus on your content and getting it right, showing the right slides at the right time, handing out the handouts, saying the right things in the right way, all those different things, and getting it just right. Now, the third stage is that where we want to eventually get to, and this is where we focus on the audience, where we focus on delivering our content tailored to our audience and really being present for our audience. And when you are in stage 3, it is impossible to be nervous, okay? And one of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that training, it's not about me, it's all about the audience and how they need to hear it so that they can achieve it. And we touched upon that a little bit in the design cluster. However, we really need to drill that into ourselves. It's not about me, it's all about them and how they need to hear it so that they can achieve it. And when you stay in that place and really focus on that, you are able to step into an arena or step into a training room or a workshop facility or whatever it might be and take the pressure off yourself, because you know that you are there to serve and empower your audience. Okay, so the ultimate compelling question to get you to stage 3 instantly is the following, and you definitely want to grab a pen and write this question down, okay? Because many times in my life, I've certainly been nervous, and I've had to get myself to not focus on myself, not focus on my content, but in a place where I'm focused on my audience. How do I do that? Well, here's one simple question that you can do, you can ask yourself to really get you there. And the question is the following, and you definitely want to grab a pen and write this down. I will say it a number of times for you though, okay? So the question is the following. What is the biggest challenge or consequence that this audience will face if they don't hear and act on the information I'm about to share with them? Okay, I'll say it again. What is the biggest challenge or consequence that this audience will face if they don't hear and act on the information I'm about to share with them? And when you actually sit down and write down all the problems and consequences that the audience will actually face, then instantly you are going to be able to get yourself into a place where you're actually there to serve and really speak to the problem, and what the audience thinks about you, what they think about your content, it becomes irrelevant. Sure, it's important, but solving their problems becomes the bigger focus point. And when you're focused on service, it's impossible to be nervous. All right. So I'll say the question again just one more time. What is the biggest challenge or consequence that this audience will face if they don't hear and act on what I'm about to share with them? All right, it's a really powerful question, and I use it still to this day every time I need to present in front of a brand new audience or even an audience that may have heard a topic a number of times, and I need to stand up and speak about it. Okay, so that is a little segment on getting over your nerves. All right, now let's look at some great questions to ask your learners before your delivery. All right, so here we go. What was your best learning experience? All right, it's a great question to ask. A, because it's going to tell you a lot about the learner's background and past. Okay. Second question is, how do you love to learn? All right, another powerful question there. Number 3, what is something that you have learnt quite passionately? Okay. Question 4 is, what were the steps that you went through in order to learn that? Okay. Now, when you actually ask a student these questions, it's going to tell you a lot about them, but particularly question 4, when they tell you what the steps were that they went through, it's going to give you an indication as to what could be some successful steps that you include in your training delivery with them as well that could, highly probably lead to them learning and learning successfully and learning quite quickly, because every single person has a different strategy for learning that they will unconsciously go through. All right, so these are some great questions. I highly recommend that you get your students to answer these questions before you start training them. All right, it's just really powerful information. Okay, and you can never spend too much time on getting to know your students. Okay, so definitely write these questions down, take a photograph of them, whatever you need to do. Okay, so let's look at the major differences between teaching adults versus children. All right, it's a very important topic, particularly in the vet sector. Okay, so if you have been teaching children previously and then you're stepping to the vet sector, it can occasionally be a little bit of a shock to the system because you need to be thinking a little bit differently to maybe how you may work with children. However, having said that, there are some very common principles that apply to teaching adults and also teaching children. When you're teaching both groups, you certainly want to make it fun. You want to make it enjoyable. You want to make it achievable. You want to make it productive. You want to make it effective. You want to make it so that all students can participate, can be part of it, and they can see that they themselves are making progress as well. Now, what I will say though is that the biggest divide, or the biggest reason and distinction between adults and children in how they learn, from my perspective and what the research shows, is that ultimately adults bring a lot more life experience and life context to whatever they learn. So in the case of teaching adults, we often need to get a lot more emotional buy-in from our adult learners, and they have to see relevance to learning something. Children, on the other hand, since they don't have as much life experience, they can just go through the learning process, but they don't necessarily need to understand why they're learning something. That why is going to evolve for them, okay? And they're going to discover the why, they're going to discover the relevance. Adults, on the other hand, they need to know the relevance, otherwise they will not give it the time of day, okay? So that is really important for us to keep in mind. All right, adults need to know why they're learning something, and if they don't, they're going to switch off very quickly. Okay, so it needs to be for adults, it needs to be real world practical. For adults, for children, it's going to be a lot more play centered. They're certainly going to learn a lot, but they're just going to certainly learn at a different pace, and at the same time, they could learn quicker because they have less maybe negative emotions that they need to deal with as they're learning, or they may have less learning roadblocks. Okay, but I just want to raise the distinction with adults. You have to be a lot more upfront as to why they're learning something and why they're learning it a particular way. Okay, so adult learning principles. Back in 1980, Knowles came up with 4 major assumptions about the characteristics of adult learners. All right? And you can certainly research this in a lot more detail, but I just wanted to share the 4 principles with you. So the first one is self-concept. As a person matures, his or her self-concept moves from one of being a dependent personality to one of being a self-directed human being. Okay? Adult learner experience. As a person matures, he or she accumulates a growing reservoir of experience that becomes an increasing resource for learning. Okay. Number 3, readiness to learn. As a person matures, his or her readiness to learn becomes orientated increasingly to the development tasks of his or her social roles. Orientational learning. Well, actually, I made a mistake on here. There's actually 5, but that's okay. As a person matures, his or her time perspective changes from one of postponed application of knowledge to immediacy of application. As a result, his or her orientation or learning shifts from one of subject-centeredness to one of problem-centeredness. So when we're teaching adults, we really need to keep in mind that we need to remind our students why they're learning something and give them problems and opportunities to solve those problems, because that's often how adults learn in terms of long-term memory, and really take ownership around things that they learn. All right, so ownership comes from solving those problems. Okay, so last one then, number 5, motivation to learn. As a person matures, the motivation to learn is internal, more so. All right, more so internally driven. Having said that, there are a number of times where it is externally driven, and maybe a learner is forced to attend a training session. All right, maybe they're forced to undertake extra training due to the fact that they may lose their job, or maybe due to the fact that technology is changing and they need to keep up with it. All right, so certainly with adults, there is internal and external motivation that comes into play. For kids, it can be, for children, it can be a lot more external motivation until the child reaches a place where, and maybe it's 17, 18, 19, where they start to discover what they really enjoy learning about. Okay. So, 4 principles of andragogy. Knowles suggested 4 principles that are applied to adult learning. Adults need to be involved in the planning and evaluation of their instruction. Experience, including mistakes, provides the basis for the learning activities. Adults are most interested in learning subjects that have immediate relevance and impact to their job or personal life. Adult learning is problem-centered rather than content-orientated. Okay, so basically, these tell us that people do learn very well from their mistakes, and if in a session we can actually create safe situations for them to, for audience members to create, make mistakes and learn from them, that's a great way to certainly help them get educated. Okay, adults need to be involved in their planning and what they're going to learn, how they're going to learn it. Adults are most interested in learning subjects that have immediate relevancy. So you want to make sure that anything you're teaching them, they can go out into the world and apply it as quick as possible. Adult learning is problem-centered and not content-orientated. Again, you want to be putting in scenarios and problem-solving activities, fault-finding activities throughout your training program so that the adults can really dive deep into it, solve the problems, and really own the learnings. Okay, so let's review. What's the difference between training and education? Because a lot of times people will compact these two things into the same idea. And sometimes people think education and training are exactly the same, or training and education, they're just one and the same. But when we actually think about it, there are many times in life where we're being trained, but we're not being educated, or educated, but we're not being trained. And I like to teach this concept by asking a couple of questions. Now, here's the thing. If you have kids in primary school, would you want your kids doing gun training or gun education? Would you want your kids doing alcohol training or alcohol education? Would you want your kids doing driving education or driving training? Considering they don't have their license, start to ponder that. Would you want your children doing sex education or sex training? Would you want your kids doing, let's see, what else is there? Building house education or building house training? Would you want them doing, what else have we got? Education about astronomy or training about astronomy? Okay. Hopefully through all those examples that I've given you, you've started to pick up the fundamental difference between training and education. And some of the examples I've just used there are a little bit exaggerated and crude, but I need you to understand the concept that training is fundamentally when you have an opportunity, or you give a person an opportunity to show you performance, and then you provide feedback. Performance, feedback, performance, feedback, performance, feedback, performance, feedback. And over time, based on their performance and the feedback they receive, their skills and knowledge get better. Education, on the other hand, is simply providing information to people, and what they do with that information is totally up to them. So many times in the workplace, we could go off to a training session, which is essentially maybe watching 40, 50 PowerPoint slides, and we can walk away having a thought that that was training, but actually it was just education. Because we fundamentally didn't get an opportunity to actually hear the information, use the information, and then get feedback on our performance. We need to keep in mind, as trainers, we need to be very clear on when am I training someone, when am I educating them, okay? And training is only ever happening when you are providing an opportunity for performance, and then afterwards you give them feedback. Okay. Now, education will often happen before training, for sure, and education can even happen after training. But we need to keep in mind when is education happening, when's training happening, and they're different. Okay. And we don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that we're training something or training someone when all we're doing is providing information. Okay. So online training, unless there is massive opportunities for performance and for a student to receive feedback, well, really, we should rename it to be online education. Okay, so hopefully that distinction made a lot of sense for you, and you can now start to see the world a little bit differently in the context of what is training and what is education. Okay, so now let's look at the job of a trainer. All right, ultimately there are three things that a trainer needs to do, and these are very important to keep in mind because the job of a trainer is not, I repeat, not to go into a classroom and simply deliver a session plan, okay? That is far from what the trainer is actually meant to do. That is certainly a component of it and a function of it, but your job as a trainer is to do the following. And what I want to share with you right now is a very big picture overview of the job. Ultimately, your job as a trainer is to do the following three things. I'd like you to imagine that you are a hospitality trainer and somebody is coming to you to learn to make a good cup of coffee, okay? And I'd like you to imagine that you spend 3 months with them. Okay. Now, after that time, and after you trained them for 3 months, if they haven't improved or the taste of the coffee hasn't improved in any way, shape, or form after that 3 months, we'd probably say that the training and trainer potentially hasn't been very effective. And hopefully you'd agree with me when I say that. The job of a trainer, though, let's unpack it. First of all, the first thing that we need to do as a trainer is when the student comes to us, we need to change their thoughts. Change their thoughts and mindset about what a good cup of coffee smells like, tastes like, and the experience of a great cup of coffee, okay? Then we need to get the student to change their behavior and actions as to how they make that cup of coffee. Then ultimately, we need to help that student empower their customer. So what we are doing actually is changing lives. So we are going to change thoughts of the student on what a good cup of coffee is like. Then we're going to help them change their behavior on making it. And then we're going to change lives, change the life of the customer. Obviously, they're going to have a better experience through our student making that great cup of coffee. Okay, so regardless of the industry, regardless of the role, we need to, first of all, change somebody's mindset, change their thoughts, get them to change their behavior, and then ultimately, there is a life and a ripple effect that flows on from that. Okay, so I'll say it a number of times. Your job of a trainer is to create a change in another individual. Your job of a trainer is to create change and influence somebody's behavior. And the quality and speed that you can create the change in the individual will determine whether or not you are a great trainer or an average trainer or even a not so great trainer. Okay, so if you're working with people and you're able to create change in them and accelerate that change, guess what? You're probably a really good trainer. But if you're really struggling to influence and empower an audience and you're not seeing much change, well, you need to step back and look at that and go, what's going on here? Okay, so I just want to remind you, the job of a trainer is to create change in others. Okay, so now, fundamental concept. It's not what I say that matters. It's all about what people remember. Because I'd like you again to put yourself in that position of training somebody to make a cup of coffee. If you spend 3 months with them and still after that period of 3 months, they haven't remembered anything that you've said, have you really been effective? I'd like you to imagine that you watch this webinar. And, after this webinar, I ask you a question, say, what was let's pick another example. Let's say you watch the design cluster webinars. And I said to you at the end, I said, so who was the national vet regulator? And you said, regulator? What are you talking about? Well, in that moment, I can discover that I'm actually not very effective, and I can discover that the information I presented didn't really land. You see, when we actually train in a way that we speak to be remembered, everything shifts and changes. You see, it's not about speaking to be heard, it's about speaking in a way that we make sure the content is remembered, okay? So we need to make that mental shift. It's not about what we say that matters, it's about what our audience remember and retain. Because ultimately, if they don't retain anything we say, we're wasting our time and we're wasting theirs. And in this session, we're going to go through a little bit of how we make information stick and make it even more memorable, okay? So something that is called the cone of learning, and we really need to be aware of the power that the cone of learning has. There was some research that was done, and basically they looked at the percentage of information that was actually retained by different delivery modes and how information was presented. And they actually found that when people were just reading something, they remembered only 10% of it, even less than when they were reading something, right? When someone was standing up in front of the room, it was just a lecture, then they remember less, right? Audio visual, they remembered a little bit more. Demonstrations, watching demonstrations, maybe even doing demonstrations, they remembered more. Discussions, they remembered more. Practice doing, absolutely, 75%, they remembered more. And 90% they remembered when they actually taught other people. And the reason for this is, or even if you think these numbers are a little bit off, the fact is that the more somebody is put in a position where they actually need to own the information and potentially transfer it to other people, the more they are going to be forced to own the information. And ownership equals retention. I'll say it again, ownership equals retention. So the more you can use these styles and these things in your training, the more people are actually going to retain from what you teach them. Now, the very sad thing, though, is that unfortunately a lot of training sessions out there are full of PowerPoint. They're full of readings. They're full of, just watching videos and things like that. And that's okay, but we need to remind ourselves that that's a very passive learning experience. But when we come up here, it's a very active learning experience, okay? So we need to keep in mind how we deliver the information will often determine how deeply the information is retained by our learners, okay? So learning pyramid, highly recommend that you take a photo of this slide and you just make it part of who you are as a trainer. Also, look for multiple opportunities for you to get your learners to teach each other as you go through the content, okay? So, secret to making your content stick, what is it? All right? What we need to remember as trainers is that facts are forgotten. Facts are forgotten. Logic is forgotten. Okay? It is the emotional side of things that really will make our content stick in the minds of an audience member. Okay? So what we need to get very comfortable with doing is making our content what I call weird, wacky, and emotional. Weird, wacky, and emotional. And the more you can make it weird, wacky, and emotional, the higher the probability that your content is going to stick in the minds of your audience. Now, let's look at weird and wacky. Well, what could that be? That could be simply telling a pretty outrageous story and linking it to a concept. Emotional could be telling a story that happened to you or telling an event that happened to someone you know, but really bringing in some deep level emotion to it, either overjoy, sadness, whatever it might be, bring in that emotion. Weird and wacky, just think about crazy examples that you can bring in, crazy metaphors as well, all right? Now, 3 hacks to making it stick, okay? So we got mnemonics. Now, a mnemonic could be something like with CPR, we have DRS ABCD. Okay, so DRS ABCD. It stands for danger. R is response, S is send for help, A is airways, testing my memory now, B is breathing, C is CPR, DRS, ABC, D, defibrillator. Awesome, I think I got it there. All right. So mnemonic would be any time that we're able to set up a little phrases or simple ways that we can get that content remembered. Another one for leaving a building is race, okay? All these different ways that we can create simple word strategies for people to remember concepts, okay? Now, crazy metaphors would be something like when we associate something to something else. So we could say that if a heart in the body loses its elasticity, it's kind of like worn out underwear. Okay, now I know that's a bit of a crazy metaphor. However, when that was taught to me and shared with me, I never, ever forgot that one. Okay, and you can be as crazy as you want to be. I've even heard, for example, open questions, closed questions, interview techniques taught in relation to different body parts. All right. I've also heard, coming back to analogies, you can use songs, you can use, animals. All these different things, all right, even food, whatever you choose. But the more weird, wacky, and emotional you make it, the higher the probability that it's going to stick in the minds of the audience. Blocks of 3. It's a critical one because ultimately the mind of your audience member cannot handle any more information than 5 to 7 bits of information at any one time. And if you want to teach something, the best way to do it is teach item 1, 2, 3, and then you review item 1, 2, 3. Then you teach 4, 5, 6. Then you review 4, 5, 6, and then you go back and review 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when you get into the habit of teaching things in blocks of 3, you are going to find that the information retention of your audience goes way up, and it's a lot easier for you to remember your content as well. All right. So blocks of 3 is critical, and ideally on a slide, you really don't want to have more than 3 key points anyway. All right. So just train yourself to think in blocks of 3. All right. Now, training for someone to gain unsupervised competence. What we need to remember in the vet sector is that ultimately we want our trainees to be able to do it without us there. But we need to remember that in order for someone to develop confidence, it takes more than just doing it once. Okay, so what I've found over time as I've taught the TA over 250 times now, and also studied deeply into training and skill acquisition, and even my life experience, I've discovered that in order for someone to get it right, so to speak, they need 3 opportunities. So the first time you show it to them, they're going to fumble their way through it. Second time, they're going to screw it up, excuse the language, and they're going to make mistakes. Third time, they're potentially going to get it right, okay? But they need those 3 opportunities. That's why when you do a role play, you want to give each person, at least 3 goes at doing it, okay? Now, 10 is for competence and confidence, okay? And this is 10 goes in front of you as a trainer. Now, next stage, we've got ongoing performance without an observer. Well, what I've said here is 100 for mastery, okay? So someone hasn't really mastered a skill until they've done it 100 times and unsupervised, and they've got the defined result that they were looking to get, okay? So these are my magic numbers, 3, 10, and 100. And certainly, you may find different numbers on the internet, whatever it might be. However, I've just found that we need to keep in mind that if you want to train someone up, you need to give them multiple opportunities for them to develop those skills and knowledge, and giving them just one simulated scenario is certainly not going to be enough. Okay? So don't ever be naive to think that, oh yeah, I've shown them, they can do it. All right. No, you need to show them. You need to get them to do it. You need to give them feedback. You need to get them to do it again, give them feedback, get them to do it again, give them feedback. And hopefully those 3 opportunities have got it right. Now they go and keep doing it around 10 times. They develop the confidence and the competence, and then they can go off by themselves. All right. This is a little bit context dependent. However, multiple practice times is critical. Okay. So in the training world, certainly we need to understand Maslow's hierarchy of needs when we're delivering content. And it's really important because ultimately in a training environment, if somebody's not feeling comfortable, they are not going to learn anything. Okay, so the first way that we need to make sure our audiences are feeling comfortable is that they need to feel welcomed and they need to feel safe. Okay, so psychological is all about knowing what's going to happen and feeling welcomed. Safety is knowing that the environment around them is safe. Okay, love and belonging, a little bit esoteric, but this is about them feeling comfortable with other people and around them. Okay, it's also feeling respected by their trainer. Esteem is that as they go through the activities, they are building confidence and building, new levels of belief in themselves. Self-actualization is as they've gone through the training, they've discovered even more about who they are and what they're capable of. Okay. Now, where I say this is really important is about creating a really safe environment and also knowing that sometimes if an audience member doesn't like the seat or they've been in surgery recently or they've got any health issues at all, that is going to be top of mind and they will probably not be able to concentrate on what you are saying. So it's critically important that we understand what their health needs might be and how we can make them feel even more comfortable. Okay. So safety in a training room, it's critical. All right, so we've got to inspect the room for sure. We've got to note any hazards on a hazard inspection form. We've got to eliminate any hazards where possible, okay? And we need to inform any stakeholders that may be in harm's way. And we need to do a safety induction at the beginning of your training session or get an on-site manager to do it, okay? If it's your venue, then probably you would do it. But if you're training in somebody else's venue or you're a guest at that venue, you definitely want to get someone else to do it. And number 6, continually monitor learners' safety during the training session because maybe new hazards come up as you are delivering your training. Maybe equipment is breaking. Maybe you notice that chairs are broken, things like that. You want to be continually monitoring learners' safety because ultimately learners' safety is your responsibility and you as a trainer can be liable for any accidents that happen as well. Okay. So hierarchy of control, I'm sure we are very familiar with this, but we certainly want to eliminate any hazards. We want to, so for example, let's do a broken chair. So if the chair is broken, we want to eliminate the chair, take it out. We can put in a brand new chair, and that's pretty much as far as you want to go with the chair. Another one, let's go another example, for example, painting. So maybe you've got a training session and you're running it and next door they're painting the room, okay? So obviously we could eliminate that by not holding the training session there at all, okay? Substitution, we could run the training session in a completely different building, okay? Engineering controls, maybe the paint that they use is non-toxic and there's no smells around it, okay? Administration controls, maybe they do the painting at night time and not during the day, okay? PPE, maybe you get all the students to wear masks, okay? Now, obviously from that example, hopefully you can discover that PPE is obviously the last resort and it's the thing that we go to when we can't eliminate the hazards in any other form. Okay. So activity, what do you think are the most common hazards in a training room? Okay, so if you want to play along, certainly pause the webinar now and write down a couple of hazards that you think may show up in a training room. Okay, and once you've done that, let's rejoin the webinar. Okay, So what I found that are the most commonly forgotten hazards are the following. Student towards student, physical or verbal abuse, okay? Unfortunately, does happen. I have seen it. And if you don't put in solid effective ground rules, then people can certainly experience those things. Hot water, people burning themselves, and coffee from an urn, things like that. People need to be very careful whenever they're in a kitchen environment. Okay, medical conditions you are not made aware of. All right, if the student has allergies, or if they have different conditions going on that you may not be aware of. Okay, so next one, tripping on cords, flip charts, bags. So you want to make sure that all trip hazards are completely removed. Okay. Just coming back to this one, epileptic fits. Okay. You certainly want to be aware if anyone's got epilepsy or they've got ongoing injuries or back pain or things like that. Okay. Next one, broken chairs. You want to be aware of that. Wobbly tables, paint drying, as I've described already, spillage of water, things like that, noise, background noise, noise from other students talking. It could be noise from a building next door or even people working in offices nearby. All right. So these are all critical things that we need to think about. Now, things to check before conducting a session. Okay. Number one, a list of students. Who is coming? Number two, date, time, location of session. Okay. Number three, resources required and resources available. And you never, ever, 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 ever want to assume that you're going to have access to all the resources that you think that you would need, because sometimes different people have different perceptions about what would be adequate resources. Okay. Learners LLN, any challenges to be aware of. Okay. Shape, layout of training room. And certainly it's going to impact the dynamics of how you deliver the content. Is it U-shape? Is it classroom? Is it theatre style? All of that. Technology and equipment functioning. Projector, Wi-Fi, and my comments in there are test it, test it, test it. Don't ever make the assumption that, sure, it worked yesterday. Does that mean it's going to work today? Possibly, possibly not. Okay, make sure that you always check it. And my rule of thumb is check it an hour beforehand, check it 30 minutes beforehand, check it 10 minutes beforehand, and check it again 1 minute beforehand. Okay, and that really goes for videos especially, because the last thing you want is to go to play a video and the video doesn't work. Okay, safety concerns, you definitely want to check those. Okay. So, training disasters. What's the worst thing that could go wrong in a training session? Okay. So, certainly pause the webinar now if you like and write down a couple of things that could definitely go wrong. Trust me, there's so many things that can go wrong and so many things that people take for granted. But let's take a look at some of them. So, flooding. Certainly been there, experienced that. Okay. Medical emergencies. Yep, they can certainly happen. Lose handouts. Wi-Fi doesn't work, all right? Computer gets a virus during presentation. I've seen that happen. Textbooks don't arrive, okay? Your luggage gets sent to another city, all right? Student has LLN challenges that they didn't tell you about, okay? All of these things are certainly plausible and you need to have your backup plans, okay? So you need to be able to ask yourself, if this happened, what would I do? And don't just ask, what's my plan B? Ask, what's my plan C, my plan D? So, for example, if the textbooks don't arrive, what are you going to do? Okay, are you going to rearrange the schedule? Are you going to have extra copies on hand? What are you going to do? Okay, and the more you spend time planning this, the higher the probability that if it ever does happen, you will be successful in surviving through it. Okay, so understanding the learner group, very, very important. So you need to understand the learner characteristics, the learner needs, barriers to learning, and getting information about your learners. All right, it's a cycle that we go through, and we're constantly trying to find out more about our learners. Okay, so that we can serve their needs better. Okay, know thy learners. The enemy to all teaching is making assumptions about our learners. Get curious and stay open to finding out their real story. Contextualization is a major key to engagement. Okay, the more you can make it relevant and suitable and applicable to them, the more they're going to feel engaged and interested in the content. Use effective icebreakers that give you juicy context for your lessons and engagement. And in the next cluster, we're going to actually look at effective icebreakers, and they are not the traditional ones that you will often read about, because the traditional ones that are used actually break the fundamentals of what an icebreaker is actually trying to achieve. All right, so definitely spend the time getting to know your learners. All right, be curious, be open, be a great listener, and really spend that time watching them as they walk through your door on day one. Okay, technology, it's not your best friend. Never rely on it. 4 basic rules to operate by if you are using technology in any way, shape, or form. And I kind of touched on this just before, but assume it won't work and have a backup. Okay, just assume it won't work, and then ask yourself, what am I going to do if it doesn't? 2, check that it works the day before the event. Okay, very, very important. 3, test the sound, visual, and layout from all angles. Okay, so you want to be looking at PowerPoints if you're using them, and you want to be able to look at them from various angles in the room and make sure that everybody can see the words on the slide, and you are all good to go on that. Okay, have a backup for dealing with faulty internet. Okay, Apple versus Windows, sometimes there's compatibility issues. Okay, always be ready with the extra cables if you need them. Okay, so what's next? Definitely join the TAE graduate group. We'd love to have you in the Facebook group. We'd love to support you even more. And last of all, don't forget about the Advanced Trainer Bootcamp. All right, so hopefully you have enjoyed this first learning module in the delivery cluster. It's been my absolute pleasure and honor to deliver this content to you, and we will see you on the next one. All right, thank you again for your time.